The phone rang at exactly 2:47 p.m. I remember the time because I was staring at the clock, wondering how the world could keep moving when mine had stopped completely. 24 hours. That's all the time Patricia gave me to grieve before she struck. Elena. Her voice was ice cold, cutting through the silence of my empty house like a blade. No greeting, no condolences, just my name spoken like it tasted bitter in her mouth. Patricia, I whispered, my throat still raw from crying at Thomas's funeral yesterday. The black dress I'd worn was still hanging on the bedroom door. I couldn't bring myself to put it away yet. I'm calling to inform you that you need to pack your belongings immediately. You're leaving that house tomorrow morning. The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the phone tighter. Sure, I'd misheard. What are you talking about? That house has already been sold. The new owners take possession on Friday. You have until tomorrow to get out. My legs gave way, and I sank onto the couch where Thomas and I had spent countless evenings watching movies, planning our future, dreaming about the children we'd never have now. The same couch where he'd held me just 3 weeks ago, when the doctors gave us the devastating news about his cancer. Patricia, this is my home. Thomas and I. Thomas is dead. Her words were brutal, final. And that house was never yours. It belongs to the Blackwood family. It always has. I simply allowed my son to live there with his wife. The way she said wife made it sound like something shameful. Even now, 8 years after Thomas and I married, she still couldn't accept that he'd chosen me over her approval. You can't do this, I managed to say, though my voice was shaking. Thomas would never. Thomas is gone, Elena. And frankly, I should have done this years ago. I was far too generous letting you play house in my property for so long. I could picture her perfectly, sitting in her pristine living room, probably examining her manicured nails while she destroyed my world with casual cruelty. Patricia Blackwood had never liked me from the moment Thomas brought me home. I wasn't wealthy enough, sophisticated enough, or connected enough for her precious son. Where am I supposed to go? The question came out as barely a whisper. That's not my concern. Perhaps you should have thought about that before you trapped my son into marriage. Trapped. As if Thomas hadn't been the one who proposed to me on bended knee in this very living room, tears in his eyes as he promised to love me forever. As if he hadn't spent years defending our marriage against her constant attacks. The buyers will be there Friday morning at 9 a.m. sharp, Patricia continued, her voice growing more satisfied with each word. I suggest you use your time wisely. Oh, and Elena? Don't even think about taking anything that belonged to Thomas. Those items stay with the house. My wedding ring felt heavy on my finger. The photo albums filled with our memories. Thomas's favorite coffee mug that I'd been drinking from this morning, trying to feel close to him. She wanted to take it all. Patricia, please, I begged, hating how desperate I sounded. Can't we talk about this? Thomas just died yesterday. I buried my husband yesterday. And now you're learning that actions have consequences. You never belonged in this family, Elena. I tried to tell Thomas that from the beginning, but he wouldn't listen. Well, now he can't protect you anymore. The cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. This woman had raised the man I loved, yet she seemed incapable of basic human compassion. Even now, in my darkest hour, she couldn't show an ounce of mercy. But then something shifted inside me. Maybe it was grief, maybe it was rage, or maybe it was finally finding the strength Thomas always said I had. I straightened up on the couch, wiping away my tears. But you forgot one thing, Patricia. The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. When she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its confidence. What are you talking about? I found myself laughing, not from joy, but from the bitter irony of it all. Patricia thought she was so clever, so thorough in her planning. She'd waited until Thomas was in the ground before making her move, thinking I'd be too broken to fight back. She'd underestimated both me and her own son. What are you talking about, Elena? She repeated, and I could hear the first hint of uncertainty creeping into her voice. I smiled through my tears, thinking about the secret Thomas had shared with me just 2 months ago when he got his diagnosis. The secret that was about to change everything. The house you sold, Patricia. It was never actually yours to sell. 3 years earlier, I was grading papers in my tiny apartment when my phone buzzed with a text from my friend Carmen. Girl, you have to come to this charity gala tonight. I have an extra ticket and you need to get out more. I almost said no. Saturday nights were for lesson planning and Netflix, not fancy parties where I'd feel completely out of place. But something made me say yes. Maybe it was the loneliness that had been eating at me since my last relationship ended. Or maybe it was just time for a change. The gala was at the Grand Ballroom downtown, filled with people in expensive clothes talking about expensive things. I felt like a fraud in my borrowed dress, clutching a glass of champagne I was too nervous to drink. That's when I saw him. Thomas was standing by the silent auction table, looking just as uncomfortable as I felt. He kept tugging at his tie and checking his watch like he was planning an escape. When our eyes met across the room, he smiled. Not the polished smile everyone else was wearing, but a real, genuine smile that made my heart skip. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," he said when he walked over, his voice warm and slightly amused. "Is it that obvious?" I laughed, feeling my nervousness melt away. "Only because I feel exactly the same way. I'm Thomas, by the way. And you are?" "Elena. And yes, I'm definitely more of a pizza and movie person than a champagne and caviar person." "Thank God," he said, his relief so genuine it made me laugh again. "Want to get out of here? I know a great pizza place." We spent that first night talking until 3 a.m., sharing stories and dreams over greasy pizza and cheap wine. Thomas told me about his work as an architect, his love for old buildings, and his complicated relationship with his mother. I told him about teaching, my students, and my dream of traveling the world someday. "My mother thinks I should marry someone from her social circle," he said, rolling his eyes. "Someone who knows which fork to use for the salad course and can discuss stock portfolios at dinner parties." "And what do you think?" I asked. "I think I'd rather marry someone who makes me laugh and doesn't care if I eat pizza with my hands." We were inseparable after that. Thomas would pick me up from school, bringing coffee and listening to me vent about difficult students. I'd help him with his projects, offering a fresh perspective on his designs. We were happy. Genuinely, completely happy. But then I met Patricia. Thomas had been putting off introducing us for months, making excuses every time she invited us to dinner. Finally, he couldn't avoid it anymore. The moment I walked into her mansion, I knew I was in enemy territory. Patricia Blackwood was everything I wasn't: elegant, wealthy, and cold as winter. She looked me up and down like I was something unpleasant she'd found on her shoe. "So you're the teacher," she said, making my profession sound like a disease. Dinner was a nightmare. Patricia asked pointed questions about my family's finances, my education, my prospects. She made subtle digs about my clothes, my background, my simple lifestyle. Thomas tried to deflect, but she was relentless. "Thomas needs someone who can support his career," she said over dessert. "Someone who understands the social obligations that come with the Blackwood name." "I understand that Thomas is happy," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Happiness is temporary, dear. Compatibility is what matters in the long run." After that dinner, Patricia launched a full-scale campaign against our relationship. She'd call Thomas constantly with emergencies that required his immediate attention. She'd show up at his apartment unannounced when she knew I was there. She even hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on my family. "She found out about your father's bankruptcy from 10 years ago," Thomas told me one evening, his face grim. "She's threatening to use it to embarrass you publicly if we don't break up." "Maybe we should," I whispered, feeling defeated. "I don't want to cause problems between you and your mother." Thomas took my hands in his eyes fierce with determination. "Elena, listen to me. My mother has controlled every aspect of my life for 30 years. She chose my schools, my friends, even my career. But she doesn't get to choose who I love." 2 weeks later, he proposed. Patricia didn't speak to him for 6 months. Our wedding was small and beautiful, held in the garden of the house Thomas had bought for us, the house Patricia claimed she owned. She attended, dressed in black like she was mourning, and spent the entire reception telling anyone who'd listen that the marriage wouldn't last a year. But we proved her wrong. 8 wonderful years of proving her wrong, until cancer stole Thomas away and left me defenseless against her cruelty. Now, sitting in our living room with her threats still ringing in my ears, I realized Patricia had been planning this moment since our wedding day. She just didn't know that Thomas had been planning too. The law office of Henderson and Associates felt like a tomb. Dark wood paneling, heavy curtains, and the smell of old leather books created an atmosphere that matched my mood perfectly. I sat in the uncomfortable chair across from Mr. Henderson's desk, my hands trembling as I clutched the tissue box he'd offered me. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm so sorry for your loss," Mr. Henderson said, adjusting his glasses nervously. He was a thin man in his 60s, with kind eyes that couldn't quite meet mine. "Thomas was a good man, a very good man." "Thank you," I whispered. "Mr. Henderson, I need to ask you about the house. Patricia called yesterday and said—" Yes, I know." He shuffled through papers on his desk, his movements jerky and anxious. "Mrs. Blackwood contacted me this morning. She's quite insistent about the property transfer." My heart sank. "So it's true? The house belongs to her?" Mr. Henderson opened his mouth to answer, But before he could speak, the office door burst open. Patricia swept in like a storm cloud, dressed in an expensive black suit that probably cost more than I made in 3 months. "Elena," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. "I see you've finally decided to face reality." She settled into the chair beside me without being invited, placing a leather briefcase on her lap with the precision of a general preparing for battle. Everything about her screamed money and power, from her perfectly styled silver hair to her diamond earrings that caught the light every time she moved. "Mrs. Blackwood." "Mr." Henderson stammered. "I was just explaining the situation to Mrs. Martinez." "Then explain faster," Patricia snapped. "I have buyers coming to view the property this afternoon, and I need this matter settled immediately." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder of documents, spreading them across Mr. Henderson's desk like playing cards. "As you can see, the deed to 1247 Maple Street has been in the Blackwood family name for 15 years. Thomas was merely living there with my permission." I stared at the papers, the legal language swimming before my eyes. Property deeds, transfer documents, official stamps. It all looked legitimate and terrifying. "But Thomas told me the house was ours," I said weakly. "He said we owned it together." Patricia's laugh was sharp and cruel. "My dear girl, Thomas said many things. He was always prone to romantic fantasies. The reality is that I purchased that house as an investment property in 2009. I allowed Thomas to live there because he was my son, but the ownership was never in question." Mr. Henderson cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Mrs. Blackwood, perhaps we should review." "There's nothing to review," Patricia cut him off. "The paperwork is clear. Elena has no legal claim to the property whatsoever. In fact, she should be grateful I'm giving her until tomorrow to vacate, instead of calling the police for trespassing." I felt like I was drowning. The walls of the office seemed to be closing in, and Patricia's voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. This couldn't be happening. Thomas wouldn't have lied to me about something so important. "I don't understand," I said, my voice barely audible. "Thomas and I looked at houses together. We chose that one together. He said it was our fresh start." "Thomas was sentimental," Patricia replied coldly. "He probably convinced himself it was yours because that's what he wanted to believe. But wanting something doesn't make it legally binding." She pulled out another document, a sales contract with today's date. "The Johnsons are purchasing the property for $450,000. They're cash buyers, and the sale will close on Friday. You need to be gone by then." "Mrs. Blackwood." "Mr." Henderson said, his voice strained. "Don't you think this is rather sudden? Mrs. Martinez just buried her husband yesterday. Perhaps we could arrange for a longer transition period." "Absolutely not." Patricia's eyes were ice cold. "I've been more than patient with this situation. Elena has had 8 years to establish her own life and financial independence. It's not my responsibility to house her indefinitely out of misplaced charity." I looked at Mr. Henderson desperately, hoping he'd say something to help me, but he just stared down at his hands. His discomfort was obvious, but he seemed powerless against Patricia's determination. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked, hating how small and helpless I sounded. "That's not my concern," Patricia said, snapping her briefcase shut. "You're a grown woman with a job. Figure it out." She stood up, smoothing down her skirt with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Henderson, please prepare the final paperwork for the sale. I want everything ready for closing on Friday." As she headed for the door, she paused and looked back at me with something that might have been pity if it hadn't been so cold. "Elena, this is for the best. You never belonged in Thomas's world anyway. Now you can go back to where you came from and stop pretending to be something you're not." The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving me alone with Mr. Henderson and the crushing weight of my new reality. But something felt wrong. Very wrong. I drove home in a daze, Patricia's cruel words echoing in my mind. The house looked different somehow. Smaller, more fragile, like it might disappear if I blinked too hard. Our neighbors were outside watering their gardens, living their normal lives while mine crumbled around me. Inside, everything felt foreign. The couch where Thomas and I had cuddled every evening, the kitchen table where we'd shared countless meals and conversations, the bedroom where we'd whispered our dreams to each other in the dark. How could all of this never have been mine? I wandered through the rooms like a ghost, touching familiar objects that suddenly felt like they belonged to someone else. Thomas's coffee mug still sat in the sink from yesterday morning. His reading glasses were on the nightstand next to a book he'd never finish. His presence was everywhere, but so was the growing certainty that something wasn't right about Patricia's story. Thomas had been many things. Romantic, optimistic, sometimes impractical, but he wasn't a liar. He'd been so proud when we moved into this house, so excited about making it ours. He'd spent hours planning renovations, talking about the garden we'd plant, the children's rooms we'd add someday. Would he really have built all those dreams on a foundation of lies? I found myself standing in our bedroom, staring at our wedding photo on the dresser. We looked so young and hopeful, Thomas's arm around my waist as we laughed at something the photographer had said. Behind the frame, I noticed something I'd never seen before. A tiny gap between the photo and the wall. Curious, I lifted the frame and discovered a small lever hidden behind it. My heart started racing as I pressed it, and a section of the wall swung open like a door, revealing a hidden safe I never knew existed. My hands shook as I stared at the electronic keypad. Thomas had always been secretive about some things. Not in a suspicious way, but in a protective way. He'd handle all our important paperwork, saying he didn't want me to worry about boring legal stuff. I'd thought it was sweet. Now I wondered what he'd been protecting me from. I tried our anniversary date. Nothing. Our wedding date? Nothing. Then, almost without thinking, I entered my birthday. The day Thomas always said was the most important day in his life, because it was the day I was born. The safe clicked open. Inside were stacks of documents, folders, and a thick envelope with my name written on it in Thomas's handwriting. My heart pounded as I pulled everything out, spreading it across our bed like pieces of a puzzle I was desperate to solve. The envelope contained a letter dated just 2 months ago, right after Thomas's cancer diagnosis. My vision blurred with tears as I recognized his careful handwriting. My dearest Elena, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and my mother has probably already made her move. I'm so sorry I couldn't tell you about this while I was alive, but I needed to protect you in the only way I knew how. I had to stop reading to wipe my eyes, my hands trembling as I continued. My mother has been trying to control our finances for years. She's been forging documents, manipulating bank accounts, and using her connections to make it look like she owns assets that legally belong to us. I've been building a case against her for the past 3 years, collecting evidence of her fraud. The words hit me like lightning. Fraud. Patricia had been committing fraud. I set the letter aside and grabbed the first folder. Inside were bank statements showing mysterious transfers from accounts I didn't even know existed. Thousands of dollars moving from Thomas's name to Patricia's, with forged signatures that looked nothing like his actual handwriting. The second folder contained property records. Real ones, not the fake documents Patricia had shown Mr. Henderson. These showed that Thomas had purchased our house in 2011, 2 years after we were married, using money from his own inheritance. Patricia's name appeared nowhere on the legitimate paperwork, but the third folder made my blood run cold. It contained copies of legal documents Patricia had been filing over the years, slowly transferring ownership of Thomas's assets to herself. She'd been stealing from her own son for years, using her wealth and connections to make it all look legal. The final folder contained the most shocking discovery of all. Documents showing that Thomas had secretly transferred full ownership of our house to me 2 years ago, along with several other assets Patricia didn't even know about. He'd done it through a complex legal arrangement designed to protect everything from his mother's manipulation. I picked up the letter again, my hands steadier now. Elena, you are the legal owner of our house and much more. I've made sure Patricia can never take away your security. The documents in this safe prove everything. Take them to a lawyer, not Henderson. He's too scared of my mother. And fight back. You're stronger than you know, my love. Don't let her win. I sat on our bed, surrounded by evidence of Patricia's years of deception, and felt something I hadn't experienced since Thomas's diagnosis. Hope. Patricia thought she was so clever, but she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated both of us. I spent the entire night going through every document in Thomas's hidden safe, my coffee growing cold as I pieced together the full scope of Patricia's deception. By dawn, I had a clear picture of what she'd been doing, and more importantly, what Thomas had done to stop her. The property records were crystal clear. In 2011, Thomas had used his inheritance from his grandfather, money Patricia had no claim to purchase our house outright. The deed was in his name alone, with no mention of Patricia anywhere. She'd been lying about owning it from the beginning. But the real shock came when I found the transfer documents from 2 years ago. Thomas hadn't just protected our house, he'd quietly transferred ownership of everything to me. The house, his investment accounts, even his share of the family business that Patricia thought she controlled. All of it was legally mine. I understood now why he'd been so secretive about our finances. He'd been protecting me from a war I didn't even know was being fought. The forged documents Patricia had shown Mr. Henderson were masterful fakes, but they were still fakes. She'd been using her wealth and connections to create false paperwork for years, slowly stealing from Thomas while making it look legitimate. The real documents told a completely different story. My phone rang at 7 a.m. It was my brother Carlos, calling from Phoenix where he worked as a contractor. Elena, I've been worried sick about you. How are you holding up? Carlos, I said, my voice stronger than it had been in days. I need your help. Can you recommend a good lawyer? Someone who's not afraid of wealthy people and their threats? What's going on? Is Patricia giving you trouble? I told him everything. The phone call, the meeting with Mr. Henderson, Patricia's claims about the house. But then I told him about what I'd found in Thomas's safe. That witch, Carlos growled. I never trusted her. Thomas was too good for his own good, always trying to see the best in people. But you've got her now, Elena. You've got her dead to rights. I know a lawyer, he continued. Rebecca Torres. She's tough as nails and she specializes in fraud cases. She helped me when my old boss tried to cheat me out of my pension. I'll call her right now. By 10 a.m., I was sitting in Rebecca Torres's office, a modern space with glass walls and motivational posters that felt like the complete opposite of Mr. Henderson's dusty tomb. Rebecca was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and an even sharper suit. Mrs. Martinez, she said after reviewing all the documents, what your mother-in-law has done isn't just unethical, it's criminal. She's committed fraud, forgery, and attempted theft on a massive scale. So the house really is mine? The house is absolutely yours. Has been for 2 years. Patricia Blackwood has no legal claim to it whatsoever. In fact, based on these documents, she owes you a substantial amount of money that she's stolen over the years. Rebecca spread the papers across her desk, pointing to specific sections. Your husband was incredibly thorough. He documented every fraudulent transaction, every forged signature, every illegal transfer. This is enough evidence to send Patricia to prison. What about the sale to the Johnsons? Completely invalid. Patricia can't sell property she doesn't own. If she goes through with it, she'll be committing fraud against the buyers as well. We can stop this sale immediately. I felt a surge of power I hadn't experienced since Thomas's death. For the first time in days, I wasn't the victim in this story. What do you recommend we do? Rebecca smiled. And it wasn't a particularly nice smile. We're going to give Mrs. Blackwood a choice. She can quietly return everything she's stolen and disappear from your life, or we can make this very public and very criminal. Trust me. Someone with her social standing won't want fraud charges following her around. She's supposed to meet the buyers at the house this afternoon. Perfect. That gives us time to prepare a little surprise for her. Rebecca started making phone calls, her voice crisp and professional as she spoke to judges, court clerks, and other lawyers. Within 2 hours, she had everything we needed. Injunctions to stop the sale, restraining orders to keep Patricia away from my property, and a formal complaint ready to file with the district attorney's office. Mrs. Martinez, Rebecca said as we prepared to leave her office, your husband loved you very much. These documents show he spent years protecting you from his mother's schemes. He made sure that no matter what happened to him, you'd be safe. I touched my wedding ring, feeling Thomas's presence more strongly than I had since his death. He'd known this day would come, and he'd prepared for it. Even from beyond the grave, he was still protecting me. Now, Rebecca said, gathering the papers into her briefcase, let's go show Patricia Blackwood what happens when she messes with the wrong widow. As we drove toward my house, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. I felt ready to fight. I arrived at my house 15 minutes before Patricia was scheduled to meet the buyers. Rebecca parked across the street in her sleek black sedan, ready to intervene if needed. My hands were steady as I unlocked my front door. A door Patricia would never have the right to walk through uninvited again. At exactly 2 p.m., Patricia's silver Mercedes pulled into my driveway, followed by a white SUV. I watched from the living room window as she stepped out, looking immaculate as always in her designer coat and heels. Behind her, a middle-aged couple emerged from the SUV, the Johnsons, I assumed, clutching a folder of what were probably mortgage documents and cashier's checks. Patricia strode up to my front door like she owned the place, which, in her mind, she did. She didn't bother knocking, just used the spare key Thomas had given her years ago for emergencies. The sound of that key turning in my lock filled me with rage. Elena? She called out, her voice echoing through the house. I hope you've finished packing. The new owners are here to do their final walkthrough. I stepped into the hallway, and Patricia's confident expression faltered slightly when she saw my face. I wasn't the broken, grieving widow she'd left in Mr. Henderson's office yesterday. I was calm, composed, and holding a thick manila folder. Patricia, I said evenly. And you must be Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. Please, come in. The Johnsons looked uncomfortable, clearly sensing the tension between Patricia and me. They were a nice-looking couple in their 50s, probably excited about their new home purchase. I felt sorry for what they were about to learn. Elena, what are you still doing here? Patricia demanded. I told you to be gone by today. I'm still here because this is my house, I replied, opening the folder. And I have some documents I think everyone should see. Patricia's face went white. What documents? I pulled out the first paper, the real property deed, showing Thomas as the sole purchaser in 2011. This is the actual deed to this house, Patricia. As you can see, your name appears nowhere on it. That's impossible. Patricia sputtered, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. I have the deed right here. She fumbled in her purse, pulling out the forged document she'd shown Mr. Henderson. Yes, you do have a deed, I agreed. A beautifully crafted fake one. But this is the real deed, filed with the county recorder's office. Would you like to call them to verify? Mr. Johnson stepped forward, his face confused and concerned. I'm sorry, but what's going on here? Mrs. Blackwood, you assured us you were the legal owner of this property. I am the legal owner, Patricia insisted, but sweat was beginning to form on her forehead despite the cool weather. I pulled out the second document, the transfer papers from 2 years ago. Actually, Mr. Johnson, I'm the legal owner. My husband transferred the property to me in 2022. Here's the documentation, properly notarized and filed. Mrs. Johnson grabbed her husband's arm. Harold, this doesn't feel right. If there's a dispute over ownership, there's no dispute, I said firmly. Patricia has been committing fraud. She's been forging documents and stealing money from my husband for years. I have proof of everything. I spread more documents across the coffee table. Bank statements showing the illegal transfers, copies of Patricia's forged signatures, evidence of her systematic theft. The Johnsons stared at the papers in horror. Mrs. Blackwood, Mr. Johnson said, his voice tight with anger. You told us this was a clean sale. You said there were no liens, no disputes, no complications. Patricia's composure was cracking. Elena, you don't know what you're talking about. Those documents are what, Patricia? Fake? Like the ones you've been creating for years? I pulled out Thomas's letter, my voice growing stronger with each word. My husband documented everything. Every forged signature, every illegal transfer, every lie you told. He knew you'd try something like this after he died, so he protected me. This is ridiculous, Patricia snapped, but she was backing toward the door. Harold, Margaret, don't listen to her. She's obviously having some kind of breakdown. Actually, came a voice from the doorway, Mrs. Martinez is telling the truth. Rebecca Torres stepped into the room, her briefcase in one hand and official-looking papers in the other. I'm Rebecca Torres, Mrs. Martinez's attorney. Mrs. Blackwood, you're in serious legal trouble. Patricia's face went from white to gray. Who are you? You have no right to be here. I have every right to be here, Rebecca replied coolly. This is my client's property, and you're trespassing. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, I'm afraid you've been the victims of attempted fraud. Mrs. Blackwood has no legal authority to sell this house. Mr. Johnson turned to Patricia, his face red with fury. We put down a $50,000 deposit. We sold our old house. We have movers coming tomorrow. I can explain, Patricia stammered, but the words wouldn't come. The explanation is simple, Rebecca said, pulling out another document. Mrs. Blackwood has been running a sophisticated fraud operation for years. We have enough evidence to file criminal charges. Patricia looked around the room like a trapped animal, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. Now, I said, my voice steady and strong, let's talk about what happens next. The silence in my living room was deafening. Patricia stood frozen by the door, her face a mask of shock and growing panic. The Johnsons clutched each other, their dream home purchase turning into a nightmare. Rebecca calmly arranged her legal documents on my coffee table like she was setting up for a business meeting. Mrs. Blackwood, Rebecca began, her voice professional but ice cold. You have two choices. We can handle this quietly, or we can make it very public. The choice is entirely yours. Patricia's hands trembled as she gripped her purse. I don't know what you think you can prove. We can prove everything, I interrupted, standing up and facing the woman who had tormented me for 8 years. Thomas documented every single crime you committed. Every forged signature, every stolen dollar, every lie you told. He spent 3 years building an airtight case against you. I picked up one of the bank statements, holding it where everyone could see. This shows you stealing $15,000 from Thomas's account in March 2023. This signature isn't even close to his real handwriting. Patricia's composure finally cracked completely. He was my son! That money should have been mine anyway! But it wasn't yours, Rebecca said firmly. It was theft. Grand theft, to be precise. In this state, that carries a sentence of up to 10 years in prison. Mrs. Johnson gasped. 10 years? At minimum, Rebecca continued. Add in the fraud charges, the forgery, the attempted sale of property she doesn't own, and we're looking at serious federal crimes. Mrs. Blackwood could spend the rest of her life in prison. Patricia sank into the nearest chair, her face gray with terror. The powerful, controlling woman who had ruled over everyone with fear and money was suddenly just a frightened old lady facing the consequences of her actions. What do you want? She whispered. I looked at Thomas's photo on the mantel, drawing strength from his memory. I want you to return every penny you stole from my husband. I want you to compensate Mr. and Mrs. Johnson for the money they've lost because of your fraud. And I want you to publicly apologize for what you've done. And if I refuse? Rebecca smiled that sharp smile again. Then we file criminal charges this afternoon. Your arrest will be in tomorrow's newspaper. Your friends at the country club will read about it over their morning coffee. Your reputation, your social standing, everything you've built your life on will be destroyed. Patricia's breathing became shallow and rapid. She was having a panic attack, realizing that her world of privilege and power couldn't protect her from the law. How much? She asked, her voice barely audible. Rebecca consulted her notes. Based on our analysis of the financial records, you've stolen approximately $180,000 from Thomas over the past 5 years. Add interest and penalties, and we're looking at $220,000, plus $75,000 to compensate the Johnsons for their losses, I added. They sold their house, paid deposits, hired movers, all because you lied to them. Patricia closed her eyes, calculating the cost of her freedom. That's almost $300,000. That's the price of staying out of prison, Rebecca said bluntly. And frankly, it's a bargain compared to what you've put Mrs. Martinez through. Mr. Johnson stepped forward, his anger still burning bright. What about our house? We sold our house because of you. I'll help you find something better, Patricia said desperately. I have connections in real estate. I can make some calls. We don't want your help, Mrs. Johnson said firmly. We just want our money back so we can start over. I watched Patricia struggle with the decision, seeing her weigh her options. Prison and public humiliation, or financial loss and private shame. For someone who valued her reputation above everything else, it wasn't really a choice at all. Fine, she said finally. I'll pay. But I want this kept completely confidential. That depends on you, Rebecca replied. As long as you fulfill your obligations and stay away from Mrs. Martinez, this remains a private matter. But if you ever contact her again, if you ever try to interfere in her life, we'll file those criminal charges immediately. Patricia nodded weakly, defeated. Over the next 2 hours, Rebecca handled the legal details while I watched Patricia's empire of lies crumble. She made phone calls to her bank, arranging wire transfers. She signed documents admitting to the fraud and agreeing to the financial settlement. She even wrote a formal apology letter, though her handwriting shook so badly it was barely legible. When it was over, Patricia stood at my front door one last time, looking older and smaller than I'd ever seen her. Elena, she said quietly, I want you to know, Thomas really did love you. I know he did, I replied. And he protected me from you, even after death. That's what real love looks like, Patricia. Something you never understood. She left without another word, and I never saw her again. 6 months later, I transformed our house into a support center for widows dealing with difficult family situations. I named it Thomas's Haven, and hung his photo in the main room, where his gentle smile could watch over other women finding their strength. Patricia had tried to take everything from me, but she'd forgotten one crucial thing. Love is stronger than greed, and truth always wins in the end. Thomas's final gift wasn't just the house or the money. It was teaching me that I was stronger than I ever knew.